And before we get started, I think it is only appropriate that we recognize that we're all meeting on Treaty 6 territory, which is a traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples, including Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota, and Dene peoples. Sunday marked the UN's International Mountain Day, and the Canadian Mountain Network celebrated with an hour-long live stream that connected mountain communities across Western Canada. That included places like Haines Junction, Yukon, Banff, Jasper, as well as some webcams all around BC, Alberta, and the Yukon. And we wanted to share with you just a sneak peek of some of that hour-long live stream. So here you go, take a look.
Welcome to the Canadian Mountain Network's first ever International Mountain Day live stream.
Jasper is a beautiful place to come out and experience the mountains.
The United Nations first declared International Mountain Day in 2003, and ever since, on December 11th, communities from around the world come together to celebrate and bring awareness to the world's mountain environments and the people and cultures that inhabit them. Let's check in now with some webcams. Here's a shot from Banff. This is in the west end of Glacier National Park right now. There's Lake Louise. There are many skiers that are heading out, about to enjoy the slope. This is Marmot Basin. Some hungry skiers heading in to the lodge. We're going to head to Haines Junction now.
You see the St. Elias Range, which is the front range of the largest non-polar ice cap in the world. Here we are inside of the St. Elias Convention Center.
We're going to be heading down to Banff, to the White Museum, Archives and Library. As you can see, some gorgeous photos taken by Bert. And Brittany, it makes me think, like, imagine Instagram had been around at that time. The mountains would have been way more populated, like right away. They're just so gorgeous. We're going to be heading to the Jasper Public Library, where I see Greg Deagle with the Jasper Artists Guild.
We are a nonprofit visual arts group centered here in Jasper. We've been together for 15 years. We have operated out of a real eclectic set of different venues.
Thank you so much for joining us today, for hearing stories from Haines Junction, from Jasper, from Banff. We've been able to see some webcams from around BC, Alberta, and the Yukon. And thank you for hopefully engaging at #MountainsMatter on Twitter. If you're using it, it works on Instagram as well. And if you want any more information about the upcoming International Mountain Day Festival that is happening at the University of Alberta this week, you can always head to internationalmountainday.ca for more information. And of course, for links to all sorts of wonderful projects that we've talked about today on the broadcast. So thank you so much for joining me, and have a fantastic International Mountain Day.
It's just a taste there of how some of the communities in Canada celebrated International Mountain Day. I think it's a good way to kick off today's symposium. Before we get started with our guest speakers today, I'd first like to invite the university's Dean of Science up to speak, Dr. Jonathan Schaeffer. Dr. Schaeffer's research is primarily in artificial intelligence, but he does have a passion for the outdoors and has actually written a novel, a historical fiction novel based on 19th century exploration of the Canadian Arctic. I understand it is finished and he's looking for publishers, if anyone knows anyone. Anyhow, a round of applause, and let's invite Dr. Schaeffer up.
It has been a delight to be a participant in this week's Mountain Festival. I'm not sure how many people in this room have had a chance to go to some of the events, but I've been to 2 of them, and they've been fabulous. They've been fun, they've been educational, but most importantly, they've been inspiring. And I have every expectation that today's events will be just like the previous events this week. In the Faculty of Science, we do a lot of very interesting research, but when you hear about the topics that we do, they're all the kinds of things that you'd expect in a Faculty of Science. You could pigeonhole them and you know exactly what department they're in. But when I tell people that we're doing mountains, people scratch their head and say, mountains, what's that? It's not physics, it's not chemistry, it's not math. What is mountains? And then you start explaining to them what's involved in studying the mountains. And slowly but surely a smile comes on their face, and they say, that's really interesting. It's different. It's multidisciplinary science in a way that people haven't thought about it before. And so there's a certain cachet about doing mountains research that I think is really important, because it sets us apart from what other people are doing. Now, mountains is so broad. It's multidisciplinary in the way exactly you think that university should work. Because we're not just talking about the sciences and the engineering, we're talking about the arts, we're talking about medicine, we're talking about biodiversity and agriculture, we're talking about legal aspects, we're talking about business aspects, and many other facets that affect the university. In these days of climate change, the world is changing. Much of this change is felt most acutely in the north, but also in the mountains. And the mountains are calling out. We need someone who listens. The Canadian Mountain Network, what we're going to be talking about here today, is that group that listens. This group is going to do research that is fundamental, foundational, visionary, and absolutely necessary for Alberta, for Canada, and for the world. Thank you for coming to today's events, and I hope that you will be as stimulated and inspired as I have been this week and will be today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Dr. Schaeffer. And I think it is really interesting when we think about how interdisciplinary all of this is, and the speakers you'll be hearing from today. It's such a wonderful mix of people involved in the sciences and the arts across the board, different ways that we look at different issues that affect mountains and mountain communities. And someone who knows a bit about mountains and mountain communities is Dr. David Hick. He's the research co-lead for the Canadian Mountain Network, and I'd like to invite him up to share a few words.
Welcome everyone this afternoon. It's been a pretty great week so far. I just want to add a few more comments about International Mountain Day, because it's something that I think in Canada anyway, we haven't really grown to realize its full potential. It has its roots back in 1992 during the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro. And there was a chapter in Agenda 21 on sustainable mountain development. And it was really at this point that governments, organizations, people around the world realized that there was a mountain community that had many, many things in common. And then after the International Year of the Mountains in 2002, the United Nations declared International Mountain Day, which is administered by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. So every year, International Mountain Day has a different theme. And over the last decade, there's been themes on freshwater and on peace and on forests and on mountain farming and on climate change and on biodiversity, among others. And this year, the theme is mountain cultures. Now, if you go to the FAO website, you can see all the different communities and places around the world that are celebrating International Mountain Day. And they do this in various ways with poetry readings and film festivals and lectures and workshops. But one of my favorite events this year was actually held in Dubai. You don't think of mountains and Dubai in the same sentence very often, but some of you may know that there's an indoor ski resort in Dubai. And the Mountain High Club organized hiking and skiing and an overnight camping trip in their indoor skiing event, all to celebrate International Mountain Day. And this was all connected through the various social media channels. Mountain Day is a pretty big deal. The Mountain Festival, well, this is something that we thought at the University of Alberta would be a way of sort of really putting attention on mountains, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But over the last decade at the university, we've assembled colleagues from across campus, actually sort of self-assembled. We realized we had many things in common, and we've sort of celebrated mountains on an ongoing basis without realizing that we were building a real strength in this area. One of the things we've done and put some emphasis on is teaching. So we now have interdisciplinary mountain courses that are taught across disciplines and faculties. With a colleague of mine in phys ed and recreation, Zach Robinson, and many other colleagues across campus, we've developed an online course called Mountains 101. This is one of these massive open online courses, or MOOCs. We've developed this with Parks Canada and the Alpine Club of Canada and Travel Alberta and other partners, and it will be launched or available for the very first offering on January 9th, and already 7,000 people have signed up for that course. So we're sort of excited about being able to take what we do at the university and in the classroom and make that accessible to the rest of the world. And finally, I just want to say something about the Canadian Mountain Network. And it's really in the last year that we've realized there's an opportunity to assemble all of the excellent expertise and interest across the country into a community. We don't have that in Canada right now. We recognize that from across universities and governments, land claims organizations and First Nations, businesses and in towns, there's a huge amount of interest and concern about the changes that are taking place in mountain places. And mountains not just as elevated places, but as the surrounding landscapes that are affected by mountains as well. So mountains really do matter, and this hashtag that sort of emblazoned on these bands, remind you how you can always keep track of that community, because people are really using Mountains Matter as a way of thinking about all these issues. But the Mountain Network, Canadian Mountain Network, is really our way of assembling this national community of people that have an interest in mountains and the future of mountains. One of the things we're doing, and Frank Nolan from NSERC will tell you a little bit more about some programs that we're looking at, but one of these is the Networks of Centers of Excellence program. This is in Canada one of the opportunities for umbrella funding across disciplines that allow us to develop sustainable programs in mountain research in the long term. So we're sort of working towards some new opportunities by bringing people together that could sustain mountain research and provide new and useful information in the future. So thank you all for coming, and I'm really looking forward to the presentations this afternoon and the discussion later on as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hick. And last, but certainly not least, as Dr. Hick actually just mentioned, I'd like to invite Frank Nolan up with NSERC. He's going to share a few words about some of the work that they're doing.
Thank you, and hello everybody. I'm really happy to be here on behalf of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, otherwise known as NSERC. We are, for those of you who don't know, we are one of what is known as the Tri-Council, the three federal granting agencies that fund post-secondary research in Canada. So we fund the natural sciences and engineering. There's the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, CIHR, they fund the health research at post-secondary institutions, and then the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council funds exactly what it sounds like they fund. One of the things that we do as a group with the Tri-Council is what we just heard, the Networks of Centers of Excellence program. So the three councils work together so that we can fund networks that encompass all fields of study. NSERC by itself is the largest funder of natural sciences and engineering research at universities and colleges in Canada. And a big part of what we do is that basic, fundamental, curiosity-based discovery research that is essential for the creation of new knowledge and for increasing our understanding of our world and our universe. But another part of what NSERC does, and it's the part where I work, is we fund research and development partnerships between academic researchers and Canadian companies. And I think one of the themes we've already heard and that we're going to continue to hear today is one of collaboration and partnerships. And I encourage all of you, particularly during the breakout discussions, as you're talking and you see opportunities where business and academia can come together to address a common research challenge, think of NSERC, because we've got funding that will pay for those research projects and allow companies to move forward in partnership with academia. That's what I do. We've got a number of different opportunities, from 6-month research projects to multi-year, multi-$100,000 research projects. So I encourage you to approach me during the coffee break and just think NSERC when you're thinking about possible R&D collaborations. So thank you very much. I'm really excited to hear the rest of the presentations, and I'll be around if anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. All right, so down to brass tacks. Today you're going to hear from 9 speakers, and they're going to outline their top 3 issues that they feel are facing either their community or mountain communities in general. I'd like to invite our first speaker, Sarah Brown. Sarah is the Chief Executive Officer of the Northwest Territories Association of Communities, and in addition to growing up in Yellowknife, she's based there now, but has also spent time working with the town of Inuvik as well in the Northwest Territories.
This is the lovely community of Talita in the Northwest Territories. As you can see, we are very much surrounded in various locations throughout the territory by mountains. Just to explain a little bit what the NWT Association of Communities is, we represent all 33 NWT communities. We represent the groups that deliver municipal services. So because we have a lot of different types of municipal government, that may look different from community to community. We do not represent all Aboriginal governments, and in fact I was very excited to see that the speakers following me are going to talk about some of that. My presentation is very focused on municipal issues, as they both in mountain communities and non-mountain communities. And I'm going to discuss 3 core areas: permafrost, water, and wildfires that are definitely emerging trends that are huge for our communities. We have a lot of concerns with permafrost decay. We've just produced a study that shows that in the 33 communities in the NWT, we could be looking in the order of $1.3 billion of lost infrastructure value from permafrost decay. And it varies. We have some hot spots, the red ones up at the top and straight down through the yellow sections in the Satu region, and then of less concern in the lower territory because that permafrost has already thawed for the most part and they don't rely on it. But we have some extremely vulnerable communities relative to permafrost. It also relates to community access. So whether that's runways, we have runways that never experienced freezing rain before that are now, they have to have de-icing. We have seasonal roads that the seasons are getting shorter and shorter, and that's our main resupply. We also have highways. So this, for example, is a highway going into the Inuvik area called the Dempster Highway. They are starting to experience significant landslides and thermal lake dumping because the lakes are actually collapsing because of the permafrost thaw. We're starting to have issues around food security and generally access to the land. With respect to water, this is such a multifaceted issue. When you think about drinking water, there's changing chemistry in our lakes and our water bodies because of climate change. We have rivers silting up differently, and it's leading to having to reevaluate about how all the services are being delivered. Even sanitary treatment. We tend to use very passive methods there, but that is all changing and evolving with the changing climate. Stormwater. We have communities that never had stormwater issues to manage before, and all of a sudden they need to have ditches and be collecting their stormwater. Huge changes. Significant changes as it relates to flooding and changing riverbanks that are impacting on that. We have draining lakes. We have access to the community being an issue, and again, food security. When you are typically accessing the land on these water bodies and they're all changing and evolving and freezing differently, that's a huge issue. And finally, we have a lot of change happening with respect to wildfires. Like northern Alberta, we've had some pretty horrendous summers. Last year wasn't too bad for us, but the year before, 2014, was huge. We had some unprecedented events. And we have two things that are changing in that we have serious drought conditions, but we also have lightning that we never had. As a kid, I remember next to no lightning, and now we get it regularly. So that's having a significant impact, and whether that's in what are you doing to mitigate the impacts, how are you managing it when you do have an emergency, reducing the likelihood of events, whether it's some of the lightning watches and things that might be happening, and just the impact of the events once they occur. How are you managing that return to the community? We have been talking to our communities a lot about how they can engage researchers better. That was one of the things we were finding when researchers are coming in, they're not always engaging with the community, and the communities have some responsibility for that too. I think we all need to be doing a better job of making some of this research relevant to the communities that you're going into. And I sort of use the analogy that we almost need a dating service. The communities have some abstract idea of what information they might need, but they don't even know where to tap into the network, because our network of supports through the academic community may be scattered across the country. And they, particularly the northern experts, may be vested in different departments. I keep coming back to this dating service model where is there a way to hook up the right people with the right community, and vice versa, with the community with the right researchers. So we do have a guide that we recommend to communities about how better they can engage and leave a legacy as well. So be training local people to be able to continue on, whether it's with community monitoring or the like. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to this afternoon hearing the ideas from everybody, and I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Speaking to the idea of trying to connect researchers with people that can share local information, I don't know if Tinder would work, but I think a dating service could work in the end. It just might need to use a slightly different format. Next up, I'd like to invite 3 individuals to speak. There's Deborah Simmons, who's the Executive Director of the Satu Renewable Resources Board. I'd also like to invite Leon Andrew, who's a Shuta Gotine Elder and Board Member of the Tulita Land and Financial Corporation at Tulita Dene Band. And Ricky Andrew. He's a Shuta Gotine artist, a trapper, a traditional skills teacher, and a member of the Renewable Resources Council.
My name is Leon Andrew. I come from the Satu region in Northwest Territory, and I'm a mountain man, a mountain dene, and that's what shootout in it mean, mountain dene. I guess from the perspective of researchers, mountain is something that they look at differently than we do as a dene people. For me, mountain mean a lot. It's a home to me, and it provides for me. What I mean by what it provides food for my people. We find many sheep up there on the mountain that we live off. We find some moose, caribou, that's what we live off. So we look at mountain in a different perspective, and it's very important to us. And that's what makes us who we are and survive all throughout this year. We depend on those issues. The other part I want to touch on is access into our country right now. So we have a lot of influx of people coming in looking for food. From the Yukon side, we do what we have during the World War pipeline built from Norman Wells to Whitehorse, 1944-45 era. So some of those roads are still open from the Yukon side. And we got all kinds of drivers that come in there and getting into the headwater of the Mackenzie Mountain and going after the caribou. As when you heard probably through news that the caribou on the western side or the eastern side are getting low and low. So that's one part. The third part I want to touch on is I think mountain also provides some ice patches for us. And the ice patches has provided some information through the archaeology digs. We have found many, many artifacts that have dated back thousands of years. I just want to stress that out to you so that you know what the mountain means to us. When we're being sent down here, being invited to speak up about mountain, I was very happy to comply because it means a lot to me. And my people, like I said, still depend on the mountain range.
My name's Richard Andrew. Everybody calls me Ricky. Me too. I am shootout in it. That means I am mountain in it. My people grew up in the mountains. That's where we grew up. I grew up. And I seen, even in my short time on this world, I seen a lot of changes with the land. Even water going low. Like my brother said, even the ice patches that how many years back they start seeing artifacts that are coming out because the ice patches are growing down. That one picture up there, you see the caribou laying on the ice, that's what he's talking about. Those used to be there for thousands and thousands of years. Those are disappearing, and under that they're finding artifacts that are. And I also noticed that plants are growing higher and higher. I never seen birch way up in the hills. It's starting to come visible. I help a lot out in school and try to teach kids about this kind of stuff and the language and that.
I feel very privileged to be able to work closely with Leon, who is a special advisor to the Sawtooth Renewable Resources Board and also plays a leading role on a number of environmentally oriented leadership bodies, I guess you'd say, including really a major focus on water-related issues. Also Ricky Andrew, who's been doing so much teaching with the youth to keep the way of life alive so that future generations will continue to call the mountains their homelands. In my role as well, I guess to add kind of layers to those concerns that both Ricky and Leon have spoken about, my concern is to ensure that community members have a strong role in developing research questions and approaches to research that bridge science and traditional knowledge. One of the things that Leon and I work on together is the Sawtooth Environmental Research and Monitoring Forum, which includes community members as well as people from government, industry, and academia in regular discussions about focused areas of research. And the level of discussion is remarkably high. The community folks are constantly challenging the researchers to really engage with their questions and their concerns. So this forum is framed in exactly the kind of way that's familiar to us. I guess what we're most concerned about from a research development framework is to ensure that people understand that when they're beginning research in the mountains, it's actually jumping into a stream that's already flowing, and that there's a long history of research that people have participated in that dates way back. We were showing the video by Jean Michel from 1958, who was an anthropologist walking into the mountains with people like Leon and his family, and Ricky and his family. My own father, who was a Dall sheep biologist, again working with Mountain Dennett to understand the biology of those sheep in the mountains. And more recently now we're starting to discuss some sophisticated genetics, non-invasive genetics research on mountain caribou that brings together traditional knowledge, questions and interpretations of the data that results from that work, as well as genetic research on grizzly bears. So all of these kinds of research processes also feed into community-driven management processes. Right now, for example, Ricky and Leon both are involved in a caribou conservation planning process that involves the communities of Tulita, Norman Wells, and then across the border into the Yukon, Ross River Dena. We're looking at various ways of pulling together data that can help to inform that planning process. Interesting mapping initiatives that include youth from the school and interactive online platforms. So we're trying to work traditional knowledge through fairly high-tech methods, I guess you'd say, for building a strong knowledge base that the community members can take ownership of. That's just a short kind of summary of some of the things that we hope that we can collaborate with broader networks of researchers on to address some of the key concerns that Ricky and Leon have talked about. Masi.
Thank you so much, Deborah, Leon, and Ricky, for your comments. And the one topic that was brought up in this last discussion is the idea of bridging science with traditional knowledge, and that's something that our next speaker, Bill Snow, will talk about. He's the consultation manager for the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and within the issues Bill will be addressing, he's also going to be talking about the findings of the recent Stoney Nakoda Grizzly Traditional Use Study. And here's Bill now. Thank you.
My name is William Snow, and I'm the consultation manager for Stoney Nakoda. I just listening to some of the discussions here, what Leon had mentioned, that I remember, and I recall back the Thinking Mountains 2012 conference, when we had very similar discussions around graduate students picking areas of study that were meaningful to local communities. That was also brought up as well in 2015 when we had the Thinking Mountains conference in Jasper. I wanted to cover our grizzly study that we had taken part as part of the AFSAR program funding available through Environment Canada. Our study on grizzly bears was to look at a traditional use study within the Kananaskis area. As you may recall, I'm not sure if all of you are aware of, but there's been a number of incidents with tourists and hikers and day users out in the Kananaskis area with grizzly bears. This type of incidents occur over the years. But just in 2014, when grizzly bears were recognized as a threatened species, did the funding become available for us to pursue this study. The study actually began in 2015, around about July, when we got all the paperwork done, and we completed the report as of August 2016. And I've just included some of the quotes there from the issues that were raised as far as identifying issues with grizzly bears in the Kananaskis. I wanted to include the photo there from the poplar tree up at Jasper, and that may seem a little bit off from the topic, but for me it represents when we see something out in the natural environment, it may not seem connected to everything else. For Indigenous knowledge, it is. A lot of vegetation, grasslands, rocks are connected to environment and impact environment. When we are making decisions about forestry, logging, they impact just more than forest areas. They impact the water, the resources, the vegetation, the wildlife that come and go in those areas. So just a little reminder for myself for that. Within the grizzly study, we looked at some of the objectives there. The traditional environmental knowledge to provide insight into the potential management of resources was identified. For us was a number 4, developing a set of recommendations to assist with grizzly management. We consciously knew about this going into the study, that we didn't want to do just another report. We wanted to do something where we could impact the way that management practices are made and are changed. So we consciously had that in the back of our mind when we were going through the data, going through areas that we would pick to cover during the study. Right now, are getting ready to talk to Parks Alberta in Kananaskis, and to sit down and talk with them more closely about how to implement some of the recommendations that we've had coming out of the report. We wanted to make this report so that we could change policy, and we could change how things are being done within the management practices of Parks Alberta and Parks Canada. Some of the recommendations that we came out of the study that I want to briefly cover: the restricted activity, ongoing cultural monitoring, connectivity, and cultural awareness. This is a picture of one of the trails out at Galatea Creek in the Kananaskis. One of the things in understanding restricted activity is we started our report by going back and looking at all of the different a lot of different things that are not really discussed in reports like this, wildlife studies. When we talk about traditional knowledge, we have to remember that there's a lot of baggage there in terms of oppressive Canadian policy. Included a small section there to include this element. Writings from Dr. Batiste, Dr. Marie Batiste, Daniel Wildcat, and the late Vine Deloria discussed the meaning of place and its different meanings in Western science and traditional knowledge. How knowledge is derived and how misunderstanding occurs, interchangeability of place, and the inclusion of spiritual and ceremony. Within some of the writings that we included, we wanted to talk about how place is different, viewed differently in traditional knowledge. Interchangeability of place is that in Western science, we can set up a gas station on a piece of land, we can tear that down and we can build up a school, and we can tear that down and we can put up a bowling alley. So there's all different kinds of uses for land under Western science. Typically, under traditional knowledge, if we have a place set aside strictly for healing, those places are more fixed. If that is a healing place, then it's always going to be a healing place, not just for one nation, but oftentimes for more than one nation. This is the way that we view Banff, the Banff townside area, Stoney Nakoda, and other nations. The waters that are included within that area as a fixed place for healing, that is our representation of that place. Some of the challenges here, understanding the need to provide space at critical times for wildlife and landscapes, understanding that wildlife utilize landscapes for cultural and spiritual purposes, implementing restricted activity periods for special places. The last one there is what we were happy to see Parks Alberta implement to a limited degree this past summer. Special places, as we understand them, for grizzly bears in the Kananaskis. Based on that, we asked Parks Alberta not to allow people into certain areas at a certain period. And they were able to do that. We're hoping to sit down with them and talk more about how to implement other facets of the study. Understanding how place is important not just for humans, but for animals and for other species that use those areas. One of the methods that we used for our study is cultural monitoring. I've tried to include a little bit here from the report on how we define or how we view cultural monitoring. Cultural monitoring is a practice that incorporates local knowledge systems used by First Nations for generations in the identification of resources and the monitoring of ecosystem change. Using that type of backdrop, understanding that cultural monitoring is based on oral history and traditional knowledge, that this is not something that is normally used in this type of study. This is history, and this is knowledge of land that comes from community. When we talk about cultural monitoring in our report, that's what we're relying on, that community knowledge in order to understand place and why it's being affected. And the challenges using cultural monitoring more broadly in research programs, understanding and interpreting the insights provided by cultural monitoring, and changing land use and management practices based on cultural monitoring. That's basically where we're at right now with the implementation of the recommendations that we had from our report. We also got a chance to talk about a little bit connectivity. Some of you may know the Kananaskis area. For large areas outside of Banff National Park, there's relatively low connectivity around linear developments. We wanted to raise that issue with Parks Alberta and Environment Canada to say that there has to be more connectivity in these areas that are being used as transportation corridors, oil and gas developments, pipeline developments. These are areas that need to be more connected, that need to allow more connectivity for large wildlife and other forms of wildlife. We shouldn't just restrict that type of connectivity to Banff. It should be in many regions all throughout the eastern slopes if we're going to assist with the survival of species and the ecological functions that they perform on landscapes. So the challenges here are understanding linear developments differently recognizing the ecological functions that wildlife has on landscapes, and balancing industrial development with restoration of wildlife access. Right now, I sit also on the group for the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan, and this is an issue that we raise with the government of Alberta, that we need more connectivity built into the proposed industrial developments that are happening or being proposed, especially in the eastern slopes. A little bit of background, the recommendations from the report, but also some understanding on the related projects. So, Ishnish, thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Bill. I really like the fact that you ended on the idea of connectivity. I think it's a great theme for today, not just the variety of topics that are weaving in and out, but the idea that we're talking about a terrain that we may see borders or limitations on in certain topics that many of the other people or animals don't see those at all, right? You think of many of the animals going around Banff National Park, they don't stay within the boundaries, they go wherever they like, and it's something that we have to consider as well, that, well, we might see those boundaries, other groups may not. Up next, I'd like to invite Cal Clark to the podium. He's the Manager of Sustainable Development for Riversdale Resources. He's based in Crow's Nest Pass, Alberta, and among his current projects, he's seeking regulatory approval to develop the Grassy Mountain Coal Mine Project north of Blairmore, Alberta.
Good afternoon, everybody. I work for Riversdale Resources, an industrial developer looking to develop a coal mine in this day and age, who'd have thunk it, in the Crow's Nest Pass area. And my real focus today is on the Crow's Nest Pass itself, and share some insights as a community member, newly transplanted there, but someone who's lived and worked in a lot of different mountainous areas, and seeing a lot of the issues that communities like the Crow's Nest Pass face and deal with on a daily basis, and what it means for the future. Thought I would start by just sharing a little bit about the Crow's Nest Pass. If you're not familiar, it's in the southwest corner of Alberta, butts up against BC and the border of BC. Many people traveling to destinations like Cranbrook or Fernie pass through the Crow's Nest Pass, and not always stopping. So that's one of the areas that the community is wrestling with. Proud history and a lot of natural beauty. They want to encourage more visitation to the area. Many people have been down there. They've heard of the Frank Slide. Picture here showing that momentous event from the early part of the last century that pretty much wiped out the town of Frank, one of the communities that make up the Crow's Nest Pass. The Crow's Nest Pass itself is one of 5 special municipalities in Alberta. It was formed in the 1970s as an amalgamation of 5 smaller communities to form one larger municipality to share infrastructure and administration and so on. The 5 communities are Bellevue, Frank, Hillcrest, Coleman, and Blairmore. I'll get into a little bit of the dynamics of having 5 communities formed into one, which is one of the challenges the community faces. Like many communities in mountain environments, Canmore, Cranbrook, Fernie, Sparwood, Crow's Nest Pass, it has a history of being developed around resources and the resource industry, whether it be mining, forestry, or a combination of both. The original town site in the Crow's Nest Pass was a little community called Lille. It's now a national and provincial historic site. You can still visit it. It's just to the north of Frank. It was the scene of an early coal mine and coking coal operation that was built at the latter stages of the 1800s. When they dismantled that town, they moved most of the buildings into Frank, where they were subsequently destroyed in the Frank Slide. But there's a proud history. There was as many as 40 mines in the Crow's Nest Pass. While the last mine shut down around 1980-81, the community still depends on mining. Many of its employees, or many of its residents, still work in mining over in BC, in the Elk Valley area, and they've also transferred into other resource sectors. Many commute now to the oil sands and work in the north, which has a whole interesting dynamic to the community as it affects social issues and families and so on. As well, it has a proud history of forestry, and still to this day, a number of forestry operations work in the area, and many people, it is a source of employment for the community. Population-wise, the 5 communities that form the Crow's Nest Pass have a population of about 6,000. Recent trends show that that population has been on a decline, a steady decline, for some time. Just by comparison, Canmore also started as a mining community, and its last coal mine was in 1981. They both sort of ended that resource period at the same time, but they've developed very differently, which is one of the interesting things that we'll talk about hopefully this afternoon. Present day, as I explained, we have the 5 communities. A lot of interesting challenges that come with forming a municipality made up of 5 independent, fiercely at times independent communities, each wanting to have their own down core, their own fire department, their own infrastructure. So it poses very challenging logistical issues for the administration of a community that's pretty much 25 or more, 30 kilometers in length in a very narrow mountainous region, a lot of infrastructure to support the community, and quite a small population base. The community itself is an aged one as well. Many people have retired there. Average age of the population is 10 years over the provincial average. Many are on fixed incomes. There's fairly high unemployment, quite high tax rates. So there's not a lot of, I guess, diversity within the tax structure of the community because of a lack of business development and so on to support some of the infrastructure requirements. And so there's a lot of challenges facing the community in that regard. Having said that, it is beautiful. It is stunning. There is some spectacular scenery in the area, lots of hiking trails. The community is working hard to develop a local ski hill, mountain bike trails, camping, hunting, fishing, ATVs, all kinds of activities. Very much that mountain lifestyle environment, which is fantastic, but it also has issues. Not everybody views the mountainous environment in the same way. To the 3 challenges, when I was asked to come and speak about the Crow's Nest Pass, I kind of thought, wow, 3. There's a lot of challenges facing communities, mountain communities right now. I thought long and hard, and how specific do we get, and so on, and I think it starts with a vision. People have a vision of the kind of world they want to live in, the community they want to live in. That in itself can be challenging. And one of the first challenges I think, communities like Crow's Nest Pass and other mountain communities share is how do you come up with a common vision? Because it is so personal, it is so value driven, it's subjective. We can have quite a spectrum of visions. So how do you create that common vision? And some of the challenges, as I pointed out, is the culture of the community itself. Crow's Nest Pass was kind of forced to amalgamate into one community, but the legacy is more than 100 years of diverse cultures that immigrated into the area, worked hard in the resource sectors, have fierce independence, fierce loyalties to their community, and so on. Different views on their use of the community and the area. You have spectrums from people that are adamantly, this is an environmental, to people that I want to be able to get out of my driveway and drive my quad into the woods every day, and everything in between. Quite a lot of challenges there. Community values. There'll be some that want to see development and growth, and there'll be some that we don't want to talk about our community. We like it the way it is. We don't like change. I'm reminded of one of my kids' favorite movies, Ice Age, and there's a scene in the Meltdown movie where they're trying to get Grandpa out of his hole, and it's like, I was born in this hole, I'm going to die in this hole, right? And then at the end of the movie, he's like on the boat, and he's like, this is my boat, I'm not leaving the boat, So there's challenges. And then, of course, external pressures, external values that come into play. Many communities have wrestled with this notion of, these are 3rd and 4th generation families that have lived in that area, and they see the world changing around them. And it's not unlike what Bill was referring to in place, and people's view of place, and external drivers and influencers that can come in, shape your community and shape the world and the environment around you, and you don't understand it, or there's a disconnect. Why is somebody from Edmonton or Montreal or New York City telling me how I need to live in my community? And set that sort of discussion going. First challenge was, how do we create a common vision? Back in the millennium, the Community Crow's Nest Pass wrote a report. It's now close to 20 years old. They're starting to look at it again, saying we need to look at it. About the same time, Canmore was developing something very similar. At the crux of it was, we need to expand the diversity of the local economy. The resource sector was dying. Coal mines were shutting down. The future was looking bleak for the community. Like many mountain communities, it had to reinvent itself somehow. And they decided that they needed to try and diversify their economy. And wow, what's the vision for the community? Tourism, ecotourism. Let's develop it. Let's build hotels. Let's get people out enjoying the outdoors and the wilderness. It hasn't worked. Canmore boomed. Crow's Nest Pass didn't. What are the drivers there? What are the reasons? And we could spend, there's some obvious ones, but creating that common vision is one of the challenges. What is the vision for the future? And how do you find a balance between conflicting values and visions? Second, how do you choose a path? So now you've got a vision, there's multiple ways you can get there. So how do you choose the right path? What are some of the things that we face? Social, economic, environment, and then again, those external influencers, people that come in and decide for you. And how does that react in the community? And the third challenge is turning that vision into reality. Is it enough to have a vision and a plan? I can name probably a dozen mountain communities that have the same vision. And if their goal is to survive on an ecotourism alone model, they all have the same vision, and that tourism pie is only so big. So is it enough to have a vision, have a plan, and as a community start investing in that plan, building infrastructure, building all the roads and the necessary facilities, because the people may not come if you build it. So how do you manage that risk and uncertainty that comes with it? Lots of challenges in trying to create a sustainable community going into the future. Some of the examples of social challenges are the demographics of the community you're living in, conflicting ideas and values, a resistance to change, and then again, those external influences. Economic challenges. How do you develop a sustainable economy? If your tax base isn't there, you don't have the business taxes to support the community. If it's seasonal, how do you sustain businesses year-round and maintain the kind of jobs you create and the sustainability of those jobs? As I've indicated, many of the people that live in the Crow's Nest Pass are third and fourth generation. They're finding that they have to leave the community now to find employment and to support their families. Creating more local jobs might be good, but what kind of jobs are they? How well do they pay? How well do they support the community? If we look at other examples of tourism communities that have prospered, sometimes those people are forced to leave the community that they've called home for generations because they can't afford to live there now. So there's a lot of challenges that come with this kind of development as well. There's always the environmental challenges too. How big a role is the environment? When we think about sustainability, we all picture those Venn diagrams of environment, social, economic. We always kind of show, well, are the circles the same size? Where do they overlap? And to what degree? And again, that becomes, as much as anything, a value judgment sometimes. And there's a number of environmental challenges. We have climate change and how that interferes with so much of what's happening in the community. And how do we find that right balance between industrial development, because the area is so rich in resources, with recreational opportunities, ecological tourism, and protecting the environment so that future generations can continue to appreciate all the beauty and wonders and resources that this area is blessed with. One of the sustainability challenges we have, and before I came here, I was talking to our new Chief Administrative Officer. One of the things we have is we have a community with a lot of housing, a huge shadow population, in fact. We estimate population is around 6,000, but we think it's a lot higher than that. There's a lot of weekenders, there's a lot of people that have inherited homes from family members and sit empty. One of the challenges we have as we move into residential development in the future is if we want to stabilize the population, what kind of housing do we need? How do we plan for that? How do we update the little one-bedroom minor homes that are 100 years old that sit in the community versus the big acreage developments that many of the developers and real estate developers want to push in the community? Finding that balance. And then the infrastructure to pay for it all. How do you develop a resilient community? Something that can withstand the cyclical nature of as we're all experiencing right now in Alberta, and be sustainable. So having said that, I think there's definitely an abundance of opportunities in the community. I think we have a community of hardworking people with a clear vision, protecting their homes and building a strong, vibrant community. They don't want to see the community die. nor do they want it to just grow to an abnormal size. So I think there's a real opportunity to tap into that energy and that tremendous resiliency that is just there in the people. And really, Crow's Nest Pass, I think, has a tremendous opportunity to become a world-class destination that everybody should want to be a part of.
Thank you very much, Cal. You did a great job at outlining so many challenges and opportunities for Crow's Nest Pass, as well as many other communities in Canada. And I'm sure, you probably won't solve it all in the breakout group, but maybe you'll get a little bit closer, and that'll be great. We can all learn from it. Next, I'd like to invite Craig Dunn to speak. He's the Chief Geologist for Borealis Geopower, and he'll be speaking about challenges for businesses in context of today's discussion.
So I have to say, as a developer, it's always interesting when you get invited to events where there's a big group of people that are like, wow, developer, that's a sad word, get out, you're gonna wreck my place, you're gonna wreck my beautiful community town. But I have to say, I'm from Winnipeg, and my very first experience with the mountains was driving for, I think it's about 1,000 hours across Saskatchewan. In order to go on my very first ski trip, I think I was about 16, I literally made my friends stop the car when we got to the edge of Kananaskis. And I looked and I was like, why am I living in the prairies? And I think this viewpoint you couldn't be more outsider if you lived in Winnipeg. Like, the joke is you can see your dog running away for a day. That kind of image for me is stuck in my brain of this is an incredible place to live. If I could live in a mountain town. I moved to Calgary about 15 years ago, and it's still not quite close enough. You're still, I think the joke is if you're a Banff skier, you're a flatlander if you're from Calgary. I have an opportunity as the exploration geologist with Borealis, I'm one of the founders of the company, was to start looking at project development much differently. I got into this gig so that I could actually, someone would pay me to go hiking, I could wear my hiking boots, I would be, exploration geologist means you sleep in a tent some days, and that to me seemed like the best deal ever. But when you show up in a community and you're from the prairies, you're from Calgary, you got a suit on once in a while, you're seen as an outsider. And I wanted to really break down that I'm here with a good idea, I'm here with something that can help your community, and trying to find that balance, what we've talked about so much, about the difference between I have an idea, I'm bringing it to your community, I'm here to help you change, I'm here to help it make it better, without getting that, ooh, outsider, developer, he can't possibly know what we're about, he can't possibly want to be helping our community. That adversarial nature that we see with the development in the business community is absolutely hurting our ability to make these mountain towns not only better, but to actually have a say in how projects are developed. So for me, one of the biggest ones that I found when we have two projects. One is in Terrace, BC, which is absolutely a gorgeous spot. I got to spend almost my whole summer there a couple summers ago. The other project's in Valemount, BC, which I describe as Banff on steroids, because you literally walk out of the local microbrewery and it's called Three Ranges, and you look up and you go, oh my God, this is probably the most beautiful place. This is the beautifulest spot I could think of if I was to live in town. The issue is these are communities that are constantly bombarded with the idea that, well, I'm a timber town, or I'm a coal town, or they're defined by their past. And so one of the biggest issues I found when you roll into town and you're actually going to look at the mountain, like if anyone has a better appreciation for mountains, it should be a geoscientist, to understand how gorgeous this scenario is, and really to miss with the community that you're there to help, I think was one of the hardest parts, because you see that resistance to change. And Cal brought it up. You show up and you may have an idea, but you actually have to convince the people in that town that this is their idea, that it could be their community vision. It could be, part of what helps them change for the 21st century. And in many cases, we get a feedback loop that says, oh, that's not how we've done it here at council. And you're like, well, why? How's that been working for you for the last 10 years? Now, if you say that, you're immediately going to be like, oh, I'm the guy from New York or San Francisco who's coming in and telling me how my town should go. I think one of the things that I've really, really found to be amazing is when those community members come back and say, Craig, what do you think? What could we be doing? And I'm like, oh, they're asking. Cool. And then you offer a suggestion and it's collaborative. I think we talked about the word social connectivity. We've talked about this idea that, am I working with the community? Or am I showing up, driving up in my truck and being like, this is how we're gonna do it? Obviously, if I was a community member, I'd be like, get out. So when we show up as an outsider and we show up at the community, we need to listen as much as we talk. We need to actually understand what the community is concerned about, what they're worried about, so that we can actually assist along the path to whatever community vision is necessary. I think one of the biggest things that Cal brought up is, you're a small town. You cannot be everything to everyone. You can't have a finance community and an ecotourism community and be the coal facility. You kind of need to pick what you're good at. So one of our projects in Valemont, this is not a commuter town. They're never going to pitch the idea that you live here and drive to Edmonton. They're in the middle of nowhere. They should love the fact that they're in the middle of nowhere, and they should own the fact that they're in the middle of nowhere. Now, some of these communities, you might say, well, I don't want to be an ecotourism destination. Good. You could be a distributed energy generator. Maybe you make solar plants because land is cheap. People might be less expensive because they moved so they could go ski at 4 o'clock at the end of the day. So we need to be thinking a lot bigger in terms of, and a lot more innovative in terms of, do the towns from, Crow's Nest Pass all the way up to the Yukon have to all be ecotourist destinations? That's a bad idea. Could each one of them focus on what they're good at, what they're great at? So Valemont's putting in a glacial ski destination. You can ski the glacier. Good, that's a good ecotourist destination. But if you're in another spot where you have incredible wind resources, and you may want your community to actually be part of that wind development, why not move some of your staff into some of those areas so that they can actually live that mountain life? Now, getting this young next generation, as we talked about the social aspects of aging populations, I would love to live where I could go mountain bike to work, through the mountains, get to my office, work, mountain bike home, pick up my kids at the local. But the idea of getting a paycheck in that small town prevents a good chunk of the younger population from actually moving out there. So I think for us, that's one of the huge challenges as we see as well, is that community changing? Are they changing fast enough to attract that next generation of not only people, but the next generation of energy and industry? The second part of this is, do they have a plan to change? And if they're not, as Cal pointed out, if you don't have a community vision as a whole, you're just going to bicker and fight. And if you're not moving forward, I'm in love with the idea. It's not the strongest that survive. It's the fastest, most willing to adapt. And we're seeing that at the community level. The ones that are like, good, we're on it. Banff is a great example of that. They're bringing in renewable distribution energy systems. They're trying to be innovative. They're trying to work to make sure that they're on the cutting edge of these things. That's the type of innovation you need if you're going to compete against all the other communities around, and making sure that aging infrastructure has that financial input to be able to take these communities forward. My last point of this is the collaboration. Who can help you do this? If we take a very closed door approach as a community where an outsider comes in with great idea and we don't listen to that outsider, we're not helping ourselves as communities, as some of these mountain communities. And I say that as ourselves because in many cases I'm in the community when other people are trying to dialogue about this. So I'm in those council meetings when people are coming in and saying, I have an idea. And we literally see the locals sometimes go, ooh, we've seen this guy before. And you're like, no, this is a new guy. It's a slightly different idea. Just hear him out. So I think when we talk about working together, we are doing research. We're trying to develop, some of Canada's first geothermal power plants. We are bringing in research scientists into the community. We work with the U of A. Dr. Martin Unsworth is one of the guys who led some of our geophysics program. We literally gave a presentation at the local pub because we knew that's where people would go to listen. And they listen really well, and the beer's really good, apparently. This is the kind of collaboration that we are trying to promote so that as communities realize, oh my God, I want a developer that looks like that guy or how they're doing it, we are more likely to have our projects go forward. And our success is the community's success, and so on. My challenge as an outsider is that let me in. Let me brag about your town. Let me be excited about the fact that we have a project in a town that's not mine. And you can use that excitement, hopefully, to guide me to making sure that that program or that development or that industry, movement forward is aligned with what you guys want, what that community wants as part of their vision.
Next, I'd like to invite Alison Ronson up. She's the Executive Director for the Northern Alberta chapter of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, which you may know better as CPAWS. And she'll be talking about challenges that her organization is facing and issues that they're seeing across the province. Hi, Alison.
I'm going to change the conversation a little bit away from actual mountain communities to talking more about the conservation community and how we're working in mountains. It's all interrelated, as we know. If you've never heard of CPAWS before, we're a nationwide charitable nonprofit conservation group, and we have chapters in almost every province and territory across Canada, including a national office in Ottawa. We advocate for the creation of parks and protected areas across the country, specifically on public lands and to protect public lands and waters. A surprising fact, we are actually the only charity that focuses solely on public lands and waters, and I think that's really important because almost 90% of Canada is publicly owned, so it's for the Canadian people. Now, the three challenges that I identified for today's presentation relate to water, parks, and species at risk, and they're really important in the mountains here in Alberta. So I'm going to talk about achieving protected areas in order to protect our water supply, working with existing provincial and national parks to make sure that they're managed for nature values, and working with industry in mountain landscapes. We advocate for protected areas, and the reason we do that is because they're one of the only solutions to a long-term decline in species globally. And at our office, we use geographic information systems and modeling to map areas of high value for conservation in the province. That's what this sort of map is showing you. The darker brown areas are where our model has identified that those areas of the province are of high value for conservation. And of course, the mountains and especially the foothills always pop out on our maps. Now, protected areas also protect against climate change by mitigating the impacts of it, by storing carbon in soil, by providing connectivity, providing places for wildlife to adapt to when they're working with a changing landscape. And they also provide really important ecosystem services for us. So they clean our air, and they provide us with clean, fresh water to drink. And that is especially true of the mountains here in Alberta. Just before I go on to the next slide, if you live in Edmonton, as I do, your headwaters come from this area. It's a mountainous area just east of Banff National Park called the Bighorn Backcountry, and it's about a 3.5-hour drive southwest near Nordegg, Alberta. But Alberta's mountains are really critical for water. Not only in Alberta, but also in Canada. Actually, 5 of our major rivers here in Alberta. And they provide water to millions of people across the province, but also into Saskatchewan and Manitoba and up into the Northwest Territories. So Alberta's really ground zero when you're looking at water. Now, when we're working to conserve this resource here in the province, it's a really busy landscape. You have conservation organizations like mine or the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative working hard to educate people and get them to love their headwaters. That's one of our current campaigns. You have lots of outdoor enthusiasts getting out there and recreating on the landscape, be it with quiet enjoyment activities like hiking, paddling, camping, climbing, or with motorized recreation. And so this is something we need to reconcile on the landscape as well, that there are these competing uses that are all valid, but they just need designated places to go. Finally, our mountains are pressured by industrial activity. So there's ongoing forestry in the foothills of the eastern slopes. The oil and gas activity is kind of creeping west right now, especially in Edmonton's headwaters. And there's a coal seam running right down through our mountains, which has the potential to be developed as well. I just want to point out, though, that none of these groups, the conservation groups, the recreationalists, or the industry groups, are the decision makers. So we work to reconcile interests, but in the end, it's the provincial government and our First Nations that are the ultimate decision makers on the landscape. If we are successful and we achieve protection in mountain landscapes, it actually turns out it's pretty difficult to manage those protected areas. So this map shows our Rocky Mountain Park system in BC and Alberta, Kootenay, Yoho, Banff, and Jasper, and the Bighorn area that I was talking about is right here. And the Rocky Mountain Park system is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's actually the jewel in the crown of the national park system in Canada. It attracts the most visitors every year by far. In fact, Banff, I think, set a record last year with almost 4 million visitors. And that poses challenges for the manager of our parks, which is Parks Canada, a federal agency. So with increased visitation, you get more traffic on the road, and traffic and rail mortality is actually one of the leading causes of death of our wildlife in the parks. With increasing visitors, you also have less of an opportunity to educate those visitors on how to behave in a national park. And so you end up with a lot of human-wildlife conflicts when people, don't understand how dangerous, for example, an elk can be when you get out of your car to take a photo, or if you're just standing in the middle of the Banff town site and decide to take a photo. The unfortunate thing is that, because our visitors are not always aware of how they should be behaving around wildlife, the wildlife suffer. And so this past summer we saw something between 5 and 10 elk euthanized in Jasper for acting aggressively. And almost the entire wolf pack from the Bow Valley was euthanized because of garbage that was left out at campsites at Banff. So Parks Canada has a legal mandate to manage the parks with ecological integrity as the #1 priority, and they often do demonstrate that they're doing that. So for example, in Jasper, they close some of the backcountry trails in the early winter to allow caribou the time to forage before the wolves are able to travel on a hardened snowpack. But we often, especially in the last 10 years, are seeing that Parks Canada's decisions are not always in line with their legal mandate. For example, when we see increasing infrastructure developments in the form of things like the Glacier Skywalk, the expansion of the Lake Louise ski area, the proposal to build a paved bike path between Jasper and Lake Louise, or the building of tent cabins at Moline Lake, all of which are contrary to the management plans for the park. Finally, one of the things we do a lot as a collaborative organization is we sit down at the table with organizations like Parks Canada, but also with industry and with government who are working in our mountain landscapes. So we're a partner to an agreement called the Canadian Boreal Forest Agreement. And through that agreement, we sit with forestry companies to talk specifically about protecting species at risk, such as caribou. So one example of this, we're working with Weyerhaeuser in the Red Rock Narrowway area near Wilmore and the Kakwa Wilderness Park to figure out how they can operate on the landscape with minimal impact to these species at risk. Another example would be with grizzly bears. Our Southern Alberta chapter does a little bit more work with grizzly bears. But there is a provincial program called Bear Smart that attempts to educate landowners and recreationalists about proper techniques to live with grizzly bears that don't involve having to put that bear down because it's become a nuisance bear. They educate them about reducing hazards on their land, putting up proper fencing, and if faced with a bear, using bear spray versus a gun, for example. The solutions sometimes the challenges seem daunting, but the solutions are here for us as a conservation group, especially as a collaborative conservation group. We are dogged in our determination sometimes to keep working with people. So our solutions, when we're talking about achieving protected areas, is always to bring the people along, talk to communities, reconcile the interests. How can community members who are apprehensive perhaps about what a park means for their community, how can they be part of management planning or designing of the park? When it comes to managing our existing parks, we want to make sure that we keep pushing for that legal mandate that they're managed with nature as the #1 priority. And when we work with industry in mountain areas, these processes take a really long time, but it's important that we stay at the table. We have actually seen in Alberta progress with caribou in the Northeast, where we have a plan designed to keep industry out of prime caribou habitat, and that's what we're hoping to replicate in the mountains for the Red Rock and Narrowway herds. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Allison, and I'd like to thank you for mixing great information with adorable photos of animals. I feel like that's something we definitely need more of today. And we've heard from a lot of different communities today. There's one more community I'd like to throw in the mix for the last presentation, and that's Golden, BC. So last but certainly not least, I'd like to invite Christina Benty up to speak. Christina is a former mayor of Golden. She also served 2 terms on city council, and now she works as a government and policy consultant for a group called Strategic Leadership Solutions. So she's someone who knows both the research side and the government side of this, and I'd like to invite her to speak now.
As Meg mentioned, I'm from Golden, BC. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And for those of you who don't know where Golden is, it's the first community. It's the first community after you leave Alberta on the Trans-Canada Highway. And it's tucked into the southeast corner there at the confluence of the Kicking Horse Mountain, or the Kicking Horse River and the Columbia River system. It's surrounded by 6 national parks. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful community that I'm super proud to be part of. So I've lived in Golden for the last 22 years, but when I first visited the community in the 80s, I looked around the community and I said, there's no way I could live in a place like this. This is ugly and it's dirty and there's nothing to do. There's no cool places. And I can tell you from my time in local government, I've become a real advocate for a small mountain community, and I loved my time there. But I was also very cognizant of the fact that we needed leaders that were going to embrace change and be open to change, and that's actually why I got involved in local government in the first place. I agreed to move there originally because wanted to raise my kids closer to their grandparents, and like I said, became a real convert and end up doing 2 terms on council and 2 terms as mayor. So I'm going to give you the political perspective of some of the challenges of living in a small community. But first I want to show you why living in Golden and living in a mountain community is so attractive to people from all over the world. Recently, I was up hiking, and these are my 3 kids up at Kicking Horse Mountain Resort. I was up hiking and I ran into an international student, an exchange student that was visiting our community. And she said to me, she said, "Oh, I'm so tired of my fellow students that are local and say, there's nothing to do in Golden and it's boring." She said, "You've got clean air and there's so much to do and it's so beautiful." And she said, "I don't want to go back home." And I said to her, "Can I film you?" and record that and put it on social media? Because there's so much to do, and we have visitors from all over the world. There's Kicking Horse Mountain Resort. There's the Eagle's Eye up at the top of the mountain there. Those are the views that you see up in the top of the mountain. There's backcountry skiing and downhill skiing and cross-country skiing and heli skiing in the wintertime, snowshoeing. Of course, there's rafting on the Kicking Horse, mountain biking, and anything you do in Golden is extreme. It is not, it's not something for the faint-hearted, I can tell you that right now. There's a proliferation of fantastic activities, paragliding, and of course some of the outstanding views that, again, bring visitors from all over the world. Some of the challenges that faced our community as a result of being located in the mountains, one of them was transitioning from being a traditionally resource-based economy to a blended resource and tourism-based economy. And Cal touched on a number of the issues actually that I was going to talk about. And the fact that in 2000, Golden has always been traditionally it was a resource-based community. It was heavily reliant on the forest industry and mining and transportation industry. CP Rail is located there, and of course we're a transportation corridor entry into BC. When the forest industry faced challenges and began to tank, the focus turned to tourism. Right? And what else are we going to do? We're going to focus on tourism, as Cal said. A local ski hill, the White Ski Hill, was sold to a Dutch company and became Kicking Horse Mountain Resort. And so suddenly we were out on the international stage. Significant investment began in the tourist industry and on the ski hill. And so there was a number of changes that took place in our community, which were absolutely fantastic. If you come to Golden now, we've got great restaurants and coffee shops and a very vibrant arts and cultural community and a very active population and great nightlife. So there's lots going on in our community. But some of the other challenges that we faced is you have that tension that exists. The tension between locals and temporary foreign workers. The ski hill is often challenged to find employees, and so there's a number of folks that often come from Australia and move into our community because they want to work up at the ski hill and they want to embrace the lifestyle. That can often mean in a community like ours an increase in housing, challenges with vacancy rates for rentals, vehicles all over the streets. As mayor, I can tell you that some of the complaints that I received, there's the house next door, they're partying all night long, and there's vehicles all over the streets, and there's about 15 of them piled into the house. And so there was often pressures to look at ways to mitigate that through bylaws. So some of the challenges that you face, the challenge between conservation and recreation, the challenge between user groups, non-motorized users and motorized users, all of those different competing interests that Cal spoke about so eloquently. But the next challenge is just by virtue of being located in mountainous terrain, you face some interesting challenges that other communities don't. For example, we're on the Trans-Canada Highway, and we can be blocked off east and west at any given time. And it's not just in the winter time, it can be all seasons. Mudslides through the Rogers Pass. We've got two mountainous passes on each side. I don't know if anyone's ever driven through the Kicking Horse Pass. There's about 3 kilometer stretch that is incredibly windy and twisty and is very difficult for folks to navigate. And so we receive complaints about that all the time. The Rogers Pass, so traveling west, is often closed because of avalanches and mudslides and because of accidents. I drive the Rogers Pass at least once a week, and I see commercial vehicles overturned on a regular basis. So just the challenges of engineering a road in a mountainous community is incredibly problematic. I know as mayor, myself and the mayor of Revelstoke, we traveled to Ottawa several times trying to advocate for significant investment into the Rogers Pass and into those highways. The big challenge, believe it or not, it was mentioned, connectivity was mentioned, and right away I went to connectivity. Actually, for us, that's really challenging when our community is trying to attract the creative economy and the creative class, and as we're looking for ways to attract tourism, in more tourism and tourist-based industries in our community. We want people to move to our community and to be able to work remotely, but you don't have access to the internet. You can go to Mexico and you have better connectivity in Mexico than you do in Golden. When I drive by the library, there are folks from the rural area that are sitting in the library parking lot using the internet because they can't download things at home because they have no good access to broadband. That's a huge issue for small communities and particularly for mountainous communities. As a local government, what we did is we certainly lobbied. We lobbied telecommunication, such as TELUS and Shaw. We lobbied for upgrades to the infrastructure and we were unsuccessful. So what we did is we bought the rights to provide service and we purchased fiber. We invested in fiber in our community. Now, Unfortunately, we had a third-party business that was, they didn't do a great job of marketing the fiber infrastructure, but what it did do is get the attention of TELUS and Shaw, and they came into our community and they actually upgraded the system. It's still really, really challenged. Like I said, internet connection in our area is very problematic. And for a community like ours that's constantly trying to, again, attract the creative economy into our community, that's one of the significant challenges that we face. One of my favorite sayings is, my life is better than your vacation. I love living in Golden. It's a beautiful community. However, had to leave my house at 5:30 this morning to drive for 3 hours, and luckily the roads were open and in good shape so that I could drive to the airport in Calgary. And it's kind of bizarre to live in a community on the Trans-Canada Highway and to think of it as being somewhat isolated. So I want to put a plug in on something that Sarah said at the beginning about research. Elected officials need good data, and they need researchers to provide them with information. That being said, they also need you to take your data and your research, and they need you to paint a picture and tell stories with it so that they can make good decisions. One of my favorite sayings, I did a master's and I did a research project on community engagement and asset management, and one of my favorite sayings is that elected officials often build their evidence after they make their decisions. And what you want to do is see evidence-based decision-making and elected officials. So what you do as researchers and how you present it and how you communicate it to your elected officials and your policymakers is absolutely critical. So I think that's, just wanted to put a plug in for what Sarah said. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christina. That actually makes me think a bit, as a working journalist, when we're trying to tell stories involving science and research and working with researchers to be able to get that story out to the public, why your numbers matter and how people who aren't in your field can understand your numbers better. So that's our speakers for today. Another round of applause for them, please. They've done a fantastic job today just outlining challenges in their communities, and I think there's a lot of commonalities, a lot of threads that we see throughout all of these talks today. Hopefully some of it has resonated with you and sparked some really great ideas. But we're going to take a 20-minute break in the Horowitz Lounge. You can grab some sustenance and then you can head to join a breakout group. Each breakout group will be led by a U of A student. You can see them in the second row there, waiting to help you out. You'll be discussing solutions to these challenges that are presented and possible research questions that may emerge. And after that, we'll be meeting here to share the findings from those discussions. So you've shared your ideas. We're now going to take a bit of time, and the facilitators from each of your breakout groups will be sharing some of the wonderful things you talked about.
So we combined two groups, and it was just really a Northwest Territories-centric discussion. Because the common theme there was Northwest Territories, that's sort of where we focused. So we started off talking about water issues and climate change issues, and then a lot of the conversation was spent talking about traditional knowledge and research specifically. We kind of started off trying to determine some research questions. Found out pretty quick that there were a lot of questions. So we talked a little bit about climate change, issues of changing water quality and quantity, things that like the water's warming and they're finding more salmon than they used to, things like that. But we really quickly found out that we could spend the whole time just listing potential research questions, and there's really like almost a need to research the gaps in the research. From there, we really focused on kind of the discussion about research and traditional knowledge, and some of the issues there, but also some of the successes as well. It was brought up that language is still a big issue. A lot of the elders don't necessarily speak English, and there's certain words that just don't have good translations. So that's still something that is kind of an ongoing issue. But really, a lot of it was about really not being like, how do we incorporate traditional knowledge into research, but how do we do research and traditional knowledge gathering together? It isn't one thing. So about including elders and communities in the whole process, not just at the end to kind of like check a box or something, but really having meaningful conversations the whole way through, the whole research cycle. So at the beginning to the end, and especially towards the end, making sure that a lot of those outcomes are reported back to the communities, because sometimes the research is done and then they never really hear back. So it's really important to have that dialogue the whole way through. It's important that we find research efforts that matter to communities, that are important, so not just having academics be like, I want to study this, but actually having questions, research questions that are important to the communities be brought forth by the communities. And also not duplicating efforts. There's a lot of data out there, traditional knowledge as well as consultant reports and different things like that. And it's important to try to bring all that together so that we're not doing the same things over and over again and asking elders the same questions over and over again. We also talked about the need for kind of changing the funding structure a bit to, if not incentivize, but at least provide funding for these activities. Talked about how, especially for new researchers and things like that, usually not part of the NSERC cycle or whatever council you're from, to actually have money to go to a community to gather that sort of knowledge, and it can be quite costly in remote areas. So that's something that could be changed to help improve that. Also, the importance of utilizing local resources for monitoring. A lot of these communities, they have the best connection with the land, they know the places, so using them to actually acquire the data, not using them, but working with them, is, I think, very important. And that's also about incorporating in the whole research cycle, so it's a collaboration as opposed to like a top-down sort of approach.
At our discussion group, we came up with the topic challenges to land connectivity and incorporation of traditional knowledge in land use. And the areas in particular in Canada that we focused on were the Bighorn backcountry in Alberta and also northwestern Alberta forests.
To get our discussion rolling, I tried to summarize it best for you in the form of some questions. What are some interruptions to connectivity in these areas now, and what impacts do these have? And our discussion touched on the cumulative impacts of many linear corridors coming through the area at the same time, and also on the edge effects that these have when you interrupt an area over and over again, creating many edges in an area. Our discussion touched on how has traditional knowledge been used or not used in the past. Bill Snow was really great. He showed us a book, many books he brought, but one that was called Decolonizing Education, and how traditional knowledge has previously not been incorporated in our education systems, either from K-12 or in university courses. There's a lack of capacity and communication to reach the public, both by our in First Nation groups and for organizations like CPAWS, who want to spread knowledge and want to spread a message and bring awareness to conservation issues with forestry in northwestern Alberta or in the Bighorn area, protecting those headwaters. But they're just not able to reach people, and they're not able to access research, especially academic research that's published in journals where you need to pay to read it. And so if you can't access that research, you actually don't know what the baseline research is in your area, and you don't know where the gaps are in the knowledge, and it's hard to move forward from there.
Some conclusions that we came to were that it's really important to establish greater connection between First Nations and academics. By doing that, we can kind of stop reinventing the wheel on a bunch of these issues. If we're sharing knowledge about maybe how consultations have been done in the past or about what research is being done by academics, then we close a lot of those gaps. There are not so many questions being asked, and we can do these analyses with a lot more complete information. And also kind of closing the knowledge gap between communities and researchers that study them. So one really interesting point that came up in our discussion was when researchers are doing work in a community, they're often employing people in that community, utilizing and sharing their knowledge, but then that kind of returns to the institution and just gets siloed. It gets locked up away in academic journals. So how do we make that more accessible to those communities? Possibly by reciprocally sharing information with them and making that a really important point of, like, as soon as that's published, sending it to that community for them to see. And finally, considering the cumulative impacts of interruptions to continuity. That could mean looking back into the past, maybe using traditional knowledge and looking at past impact analyses that have been done, kind of recognizing that we're not doing these, making these impacts from scratch. There's already impacts that are in place. There's a lot that's already happening on the land, and researchers might not know that. A lot of that might come out of traditional and local knowledge.
Just to add to this, there's a conference that happened, Thinking Mountains 2015, and something that our discussion brought up from that was that you could have academics and First Nations group working more closely together and some funding opportunities in place to support that collaboration. Rather than having governments and First Nations always working together. And so that's a solution that we came up with as well, is changing the funding structure for some of the academic grants. And finally, I put up a little plug for Thinking Mountains 2018. So it's a great conference we should all be thinking about.
So what our topic was mainly surrounded with was development of communities and businesses, and how businesses majorly interact with communities, the impact that the positive and negatives those businesses can have on these smaller communities, and how we can better communicate with those people and what their interests are, creating more of a personal relationship with those people instead of it being more separated, and taking in other things like how the economy and the environment affect these people.
Conversations mainly focused on how to connect with communities, whether you're approaching communities from a researcher's point of view or from the point of view of a developer. The kind of things that we discussed was how to find channels for participation for these the communities that you're working with, to actually kind of feel like they're involved with the work that you're doing, to feel like it's them who are coming up with the ideas. They're identifying the problems and you're helping to find the solutions as researchers or developers. So we talked about how many developers come into these communities and they are very focused on the idea of community engagement, but really there should be no such thing as community engagement, because what you want to do is to engage with a one-on-one relationship with individuals in order to really understand their problems and what they want, like how you can best help them. We also talked about how transparency is really important in this process. It's vital for communities to know exactly what you're doing and how you plan about going at it. So even if they don't agree with the decision that you come up with, they at least know how you've arrived at it, and that's clear to them. We just brainstormed a few questions about how you make choices to what is important to a community. One of the things that we discussed was kind of placing yourself in the position of the community members that you're working with and saying, well, if I were you, what should I be most concerned about with your research or your project? So that was a very interesting conversation.
We kind of moved on to how do you create a common vision? How do you bring your community together when so many people are from different backgrounds, who have different ideals, who have different concerns in their community? How do you bring all those ideas together? And it can be a really, really difficult job. And how do we tackle this job? Because it is so difficult, it's important that someone takes that leadership position and takes all those ideas and pushes it forward. We can't just stay in one spot. You know, we can argue and argue and argue and nothing will go forward. But someone has to be there to make those difficult decisions. Yes, someone is very concerned about a specific issue, and yes, we're going to have to, there may be concern with that issue if it involves water, it involves the environment. Yeah, a lot of the things that are going to be done in the area, it may have a negative effect. Pushing those projects forward is still important. All of us have been talking about communication throughout the evening, and how it is important to bring everybody into the conversation. And how do we get everyone into that conversation? No matter what our backgrounds are, there are issues there that we are all concerned about, like sustainability, food security, the quality of our water. Like, to an extent, everyone is concerned about those issues, and how do we bring up those issues within the community.
So now you're probably all thinking, we've had these wonderful presentations, we've had these great breakout groups, we now know what the other groups talked about. Where is this all going to go? Well, to answer that question, Dr. Hick is going to come back and chat a little bit about where you can find this information online, in reports, etc. in the future.
As many of you know, a bit of a backstory to the Canadian Mountain Network. It's really a conversation about how we manage to understand this geography of Canada. It's huge. The people who live across the country and trying to just recognize the different ways that we interact with mountain landscapes, these elevated places that have a much larger influence on the country and the world. The way we've gone about this, and I just want to leave you with this because I think it's important in terms of next steps that you get a sense of what we're going to do with the outcome of today's conversations, because this is just one of many opportunities you've had over the last months and to contribute to this planning process that we're in right now. And really what we want to think about is what would a network of mountain-related activities, people, organizations look like. And the way we've organized this so far, but this is all very iterative in terms of our thinking, is really focusing on Western Canada, where the largest mountain landscapes are. We have what we call initiating groups that are self-organized in the Yukon and Northwest Territories, and these are perhaps the most well-developed because they were the first. This is where the idea for an NCE on mountains really originated a couple of years ago. In Alberta and BC, we also have jurisdictionally based initiating groups. These are a little bit different. They're in each region, but the idea is to bring government, communities, the universities, NGOs, the land claims organizations, First Nations, all together over a period of time to discuss what the issues and capacities and interests are. We're also involving people from across Canada, not just in mountain landscapes, but there's interest and there's capacity all across the country. So we're engaging people in planning process in various ways as well. And of course, we're working in a context. One of the things, and I'll come to this in just a sec, one of the requirements for a networks of centers of excellence is to have strong international collaboration. So one of the things we've been doing is placing our network as it develops within this context of the international community, which in many parts of the world on different continents is much better developed than it is in Canada. You know, we can learn a lot from our colleagues in other parts of the world, and they're very interested in what we're doing as well, and ultimately we'll need their support. So a network of centers of excellence depends on having a community. If you go to the NCE website, you'll see that they're described as large, national, collaborative research initiatives that focus critical resources on addressing Canada's social and economic challenges by accelerating the transfer of knowledge across sectors and by enhancing training opportunities. How do we go about doing that? Well, we've established this Canadian Mountain Network as a way of allowing ideas to percolate up and for you to find each other. And this is an interesting process right now because we actually don't have any money on the table. You're all here because you're interested in this idea, and people have been coming to the network because they're interested in the idea. But we're not fighting over pots of money right now. We know there's funding opportunities on the horizon, but what we really need to do is build a community first. And this is where we've started. And I just want to really acknowledge the work that Christy Urban has done just since January when she joined us to make this idea. It exists in a virtual space, but it also, I think, has come alive in many different ways. So that's the foundation we're starting with. And there's people like Charlie and our other staff and interns that have been working very hard to pull all the pieces together. There's many moving pieces. But here's the challenge we have as far as I can see. How do we go from the top of the page to the bottom of the page in a relatively short period of time? And this is what the network is really trying to facilitate. In terms of next steps, over the next 2 to 3 months, we are going to take the inputs from the initiating groups in different parts of the country, from individuals and organizations that have become and will become aware of the network and what we're trying to build, and start to package that in something that looks like a letter of intent for a grant. So it'll be very modular, but we'll try to address all of the known criteria that will be important in any future funding application. Of course, we'll continue to need your help to do that, but it's the what and the who and the where and the how and the why. We need to really start to take ideas and package them in a way that's coherent and very saleable to a funder. We have, with the generous support of the University of Victoria, identified the 10th and 11th of April as the dates we will hold a national forum, a meeting, to really bring a fair number of people together to really chew through the NCE proposal, however it looks at that stage. This will be a time when we can bring people from the initiating groups and from various organizations that are part of the process now or will come into the process later on, and really make sure that we've had a chance to make the whole effort fairly coherent. And so the Canadian Mountain Network is the big tent, that's the inclusive part, and the NCE and the other funding opportunities that will emerge are where we need to sort of look at the criteria, reach deep into the network, and look at how we can package ourselves so we can be successful with those funding opportunities, not just in the short term, but we want this to be sustainable over the longer term as well. There's many building blocks. The foundations are starting to look pretty strong. The conversations like this and over the next few months we'll have something that you can really take a close look at and see if it reflects the priorities that are important to you and your organizations and your regions. And if we haven't captured it, then this is just an iterative process so that we make sure that we identify as many of those interests as possible. So that's where we're at. That sort of takes us through into the spring. By that time, we should know if the government will have another call for networks of centers of excellence or other network funding opportunities, and we'll be in good shape to pursue those. So stay tuned. This is more than paint by numbers. There's a lot of creativity, and we're really counting on you and your contributions to build the network.
That does wrap things up for today, wraps up the symposium officially. So again, thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts and your conversation, and have a wonderful evening.